How do you describe Ann Summers shops? Are they sex shops?
Well, they're not sex shops because you need to have a licence, and we don't need a licence because of the sort of percentage of product, I suppose, that we have. But that's been quite a difficult one to navigate throughout the years. But I think it's helped the fact that we changed them from being a very male-dominated concept, if you like. Only 10% of our customers were women back in the early 80s. We closed the stores down when I first started, but when we reopened them, we created a much more female-friendly environment.
And so you had to deliberately navigate those laws, did you, around what is a sex shop and what isn't?
Yeah, I did, because it was very vague, and nobody really, knew where to position us, because, the law was designed to
keep it off the high street.
Yeah, and to restrict the number of sex shops, the traditional sex shops that were opening up in Soho and so on, and quite rightly keep them off the high street. But we were creating something quite unique that was essentially lingerie, was aimed mainly at women, and that sort of, it was difficult for councils.
I mean, Britain's had a series of sexual revolutions, hasn't it, over the decades, and a lot of it in recent times has been to do with the internet, changing attitudes, different attitudes towards gender and sexuality and all of those sorts of things. But actually, the Ann Summers revolution, if you like, was a thing in itself, wasn't it?
Completely, and I have to say it's something I am really proud of, because Ann Summers and what we did has really played a big part in culture change.
What do you think you achieved?
I think the main thing was empowering women in the bedroom. We liberated women between the sheets. The younger generations of today don't realise how difficult it was in the early 80s, that women couldn't buy sexy underwear in the high street like you can today. It's a given. We go down the high street, you see it everywhere. You couldn't then. If a woman wanted to spice up her marriage, she'd have to go into a sex shop that was aimed at men. That was very difficult and uncomfortable. I remember going in myself and thinking, I find this very uncomfortable environment. And that, I guess, is what really was where my inspiration came from.
Now, you got into this business because your dad was in it.
Well, I was originally very artistic. I wanted to be involved in the creative world, and I was looking for work experience. I had no intention of staying. It was very, male-focused in all ways that you can think of. And I just by chance got invited to a Pippity party, a bit like Tupperware, but sort of clothes. Women at this party knew that I was doing work experience at Ann Summers and said, why don't you do Ann Summers parties? We want to be able to spice up our sex lives, but we don't want to go into a sex shop to do that. And I thought, this could be a good idea. And I started doing some parties myself. Eventually I took...
Just taking stock from the shops?
Yeah, taking stock, which was quite challenging because obviously it was very much aimed at men. And I started hosting parties with friends that were aimed at just women. It really was quite interesting to see women at this party, and we're going back 38 years ago, passing product around like this, sort of excited, nervous, curious, all at the same time. And I just thought, there's something here. There's definitely something in this. And by this time I'm 21, I remember taking my idea to the board, a room full of grey-suited men. Excuse me, because you're wearing a grey suit.
I'm wearing a grey suit, yeah.
But middle-aged men, and, delivering
I'm also middle-aged, but don't worry.
You're definitely not. Delivering my idea, and remember one board member in particular standing up, threw his pen on the table and said, look, this isn't going to work. Women aren't even interested in sex. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this obviously says a lot more about his sex life than it does about my idea. But I did manage to get the initial funding.
So what was Ann Summers in those days before you took over? I mean,
well, it was mainly it was
basically a sex shop, was it?
Yes, yeah.
And it was licensed.
It was for traditional sex shops that were licensed, but in fairness, were the acceptable face of the sex industry. But there is no comparison in how it was then to how it is today.
And your dad did that as you were growing up, did he? I mean, what did you think your dad did? And was it embarrassing?
Well, he was essentially a publisher, actually. And I mean, we acquired the Ann Summers stores because the person that owned it at the time went into financial difficulty and owed us money.
What was he publishing?
Oh, he was publishing anything from Tiswas, comic books, up to top shelf magazines, which is what he was selling to the owner then of Ann Summers. So he bought the Ann Summers chain, consisting of 4 stores, for like £10,000, including the name, obviously the best deal we've ever done. I didn't really know what he did. I mean, it was different in those days. Our parents didn't talk about their work. Mum stayed at home. She was a typical housewife. Dad went out to work. And actually, for me, my parents divorced when I was 12 years old, so I became even more estranged from him, although I sort of saw him once a week. It wasn't, times have changed. We're much more engaged with our children, aren't we? And
So when did you realise that that's what he did, and how did you feel about it? I mean, it's an unusual thing, isn't it? If your dad
it is unusual.
publishes
I got to be honest. I don't really remember that transition, but I do remember sort of working there for work experience and thinking, wow, this is, and now I'm 19. I think I was working there, and thinking,
you didn't. What I mean is, you didn't get your attitudes about sex and your your vision that sort of formed in your early 20s about trying to liberate women in the bedroom from your parents. This came from you.
It came from me, but when I was working there for work experience, I knew how uncomfortable I felt. And that combined with this sudden realisation that these parties could create something completely different and empowering for women really was a big inspiration for me. I say empowering for women because I made a decision right at the beginning that I wanted these to be for women only. And I could see, because, there would be a temptation to make it, for men and women, but I could see that could be challenging, that could be difficult. And I think it was one of the best decisions I made.
What do you feel the Ann Summers revolution was? I mean, how would you sum it up?
I mean, we did something quite incredible. It wasn't about buying sexy underwear to turn them on the man in their life. It was about women suddenly feeling empowered, but feeling good about themselves. And I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions, is that sexy underwear is for men. Well, actually, it isn't. It's for women.
So but where did that come from? I mean, was that a sort of a marketing idea that then became real? Or was that an idea that you had about how women should feel that you then wanted to bring to the high street?
It definitely wasn't a marketing idea because I had no business experience. And, that was something that I thought for me was a big disadvantage. So that big disadvantage forced me to rely on feedback from my customers. So I was talking to my customers, I was talking to the people that I was recruiting. I mean, I recruited 500 sales organisers in my first year. It was growing at a rapid rate. And I was talking to those women and finding out what women wanted. And that really is what drove, and probably is what we do today is quite normal, but it's not what business leaders did then. We didn't listen to our customers. Customers weren't king. Things have changed dramatically, and I was doing that. And it was very much driven by the customer.
How would you describe Britain's attitudes towards sex then, in the 80s?
Wow, it was very different. I mean, I was probably about 25 when I was arrested. I was running I had a stand at the Bristol Women's World Exhibition, something like that, in Women's World Exhibition in Bristol. And I had a few toys sort of discreetly located at the back. And I remember, being arrested and the police not really knowing what to do with me. And I'm saying, well, what am I being arrested for? Well, you're running a sex shop without a licence. And I said, but I'm not selling anything. I'm just displaying it. And they just didn't really know what to do with me. And, that was the problem, is where do we pigeonhole Ann Summers, or where do we pigeonhole what Jacqueline Gold is doing? That was a really big challenge for them. And it was a case of, if you don't pack up your stall, we're going to... we're going to caution you, but if you don't pack up your stall, we're going to press charges.
But do you think it was because Britain was actually sexually repressed, or just that the law was absurd, or or what, I mean, in terms of our attitudes towards sex as a society, I mean, those have changed a lot, in 30 years or 40 years. So just, I wonder where you think we were back in those days. Because that was before, long before, our attitudes towards homosexuality had changed, and, all the things we take for granted now about gender and sexuality. What's not the way Britain was in the 80s, is it?
No, but it wasn't just about sex. It was about everything that was to do with empowering women. It was to do with how we were treated in the workplace as much as it was about how women were treated in the bedroom. Which is why, and I know that's a separate subject, which is why that's something that interests me so much. Women have been on that journey where they've had to fight for everything that is anything to do with equality that, we talk about now as being a job done, and it definitely isn't a job done. And we're still having those conversations around gender pay, sexual harassment. It was a much bigger conversation, and this was just another thing that suddenly women felt empowered and men were feeling uncomfortable about it. I remember, the taxi driver dropping me off at my head office saying, "Oh, you're not going in there, are you?" I was saying, "Why? What goes on in there?" "Well, you know what goes on in there." Or the telephone engineer coming.
What do you think he thought went on in there?
Yeah, exactly. And there was visions of, women walking around in thigh-high boots and, yeah, it's not quite like that. It's not that much fun. But there was this, all of a sudden, men weren't allowed at the parties, and it was all for women, and women loved it. They loved being able to go to the parties, try the underwear on, talk about their sex lives, moan about their husbands, or whatever it was, share ideas and try different things. And suddenly, it was something completely different that they'd never, ever had the opportunity to explore before.
So you took it from 4 licensed shops, closed them down, to how many? How did the business expand?
So at our peak, 140 stores across the country. We've actually got 4 routes to market. We've got the party plan division, which is doing fantastic. Online, which is like, sort of what everybody does these days. We've also got our wholesale. We supply ASOS, Shop Direct, Nordstrom in America, Debenhams. So we've got some great partnerships. Who'd have thought that 30 years ago that we would be so mainstream? And there's still so much more opportunity to come.
Does that surprise you that you're mainstream, or was that the aim? Were you trying to be a rebel when you were doing it, and were you kicking against the system deliberately? Or were you seeking the kind of mainstream, ordinary recognition that you have now?
There's 2 things to say about that, to answer that. First of all, I never imagined it to be as big as it is. Although I had this vision about empowering women, I didn't realise it was at that time that it was going to be this big. It was a journey that I was going on. And it's interesting what you say about being a rebel, because it wasn't so much that I was being a rebel for the sake of it. I felt really passionate about what I was doing. So every time I had a challenge, and another one that comes to mind is when I received a bullet through the post when I tried to open a store in Dublin. Most people, I think, would have backed off and thought, let's go somewhere else. But it really was a red rag to a bull to me, because I knew that our parties were doing great in Ireland. We had higher sales per head than we had in the UK. It was obvious that opening a store there would be a success. I wanted to take it on. I've always been somebody that really struggles with unfairness and unjust situations, and that really drove me, along with the feedback that I was getting from the customers saying, this is fantastic. And just anecdotal feedback, people saying to me, I conceived my second child wearing your nurse's outfit or whatever. Random people coming up to me and saying that was like, yeah, we are doing something here.
Is the internet inevitably going to put the Ann Summers shops out of business?
No.
The high street shops?
No.
And just convert you into an online business?
Yeah, no, because look, first of all, there's no doubt that retail is brutal. I mean, it's brutal out there right now, and it's very, very difficult. Would I want to go online? No, because I think that, most retailers will want a presence on the high street. Yes, we are consolidating stores down, and we can no longer have those. Do you remember we talked about lost leaders in the past and how important it was to have a presence? But obviously, the landscape is changing. But we still want to have a presence on the high street, but they have to be profit-making stores. We can't do it any other way.
How many stores have you got now? You had 140 at the peak.
Yes, we are 119.
Right. And is that inevitably going to go down, do you think?
Yeah, I think it will. I think, realistically, we want to keep as many as we can, but we're close to where we want to be. But you'll see that with all stores. And, we don't want to be a new look where we're just suddenly having to completely transform and go online only. That's
but is it more so with your end of the market in that it's just less embarrassing and you don't have to walk into a shop? And because presumably some people are still embarrassed to walk into a Ann Summers. It's not the same as walking into a Debenhams.
No, I mean, the great thing about the parties is they actually were an induction into the brand. People came to the parties and then wanted to go in store. And, we're going through a whole rebranding transition now, which our stores are changing and the imagery is changing. We're doing everything through a female lens. We want to be relatable to our customers and aspirational at the same time, and still we want our customers to look in the mirror and think, wow, I look hot, what I'm seeing. So it's a different way of working. We're emotionally engaged with our customers. Days of old where you were like a transactional only way of working, we have to be, these days, the successful brands are going to be the ones that have a purpose, and a purpose that our customers can really relate to.
Just going back to Ireland, do you know who sent you the bullet? Who did you think it had come from?
Yeah, I mean, the implication was that it was the IRA, but I don't believe it was. People just, Ireland have gone through a different journey, haven't they? And our stores, have been much more, they've been successful in Ireland, but you'll always get those radicals that have a different view of how things should be.
Did you take it as a serious threat?
Yeah, what I did was I decided to go ahead with the shop opening. I mean, I had the council, Dublin's corporation, come over and meet with me before I received the bullet. And they were saying to me, we can't be held responsible for what might happen to you. So it was quite chilling when that actually did happen. I then went on the Late Late Show. I think it was the first media thing I'd ever done. And, I believe changed people's opinions in Ireland. And it was great, the Dublin store that we opened, which admittedly was in a controversial location on O'Connell Street, right opposite the GPO building. But that is one of our top 3 performing stores now, the main flagship store in Ireland. It's moved now. To have 10,000 people through the door on the first day of opening, signing a petition because they wanted the store there, that store has gone on to be hugely successany
What do you think of our sexual culture now?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is the internet. I have a 9-year-old daughter, so, like any parent, and she's bright. She's constantly knows how to unravel the restrictions, and, I'm constantly looking at her history, and that's difficult. But I think on our high streets, I think it's, I think we've got the balance right. I think that there's a whole piece around LGBT and making sure that brands are embracing diversity of all levels.
But do you think Ann Summers has contributed to the current sexual culture that we live in? And what do you think the contribution has been? You talked about how you think you helped liberate women in the bedroom, if you like, and change women's attitudes towards sex in the 80s. What do you think your contribution is now to our current sexual culture?
If we bring it right up to date, it is still about empowering women in the bedroom, but in a different way. It's much more about body image, about being body confident. Being sexually confident is an individual thing. It's ageless. It's about, and it changes throughout a woman's lifetime. And I think it's about being on that journey with her and realising that the challenges she faces today about sexual confidence are different. Social media, for example, has a massive influence on how a woman feels about the way she looks.
Do you think young people are too sexualised? As
a mother, I would say in some cases, yes, I think they are. And I think the images on social media can be difficult. We don't want our children to be worried, about the way they look and are they skinny enough. I think those are challenges. I think the whole way the dating game has changed is it's another concern as a parent, but also as a retailer who realises that women, has different challenges in relationships and the expectations of that relationship. And it's important that we as a retailer understand all of that.
Because if you're projecting yourself online, and that's how a lot of people are meeting their dates, it is all about that look, isn't it, and the image. So do you think we're overall getting it right or wrong? I mean, because a lot of people think everything's out of the back, out of the bottle, and everything is available online, culturally to very young people, and that the normalisation of sex, in the high street and everywhere else is all part of that. I just sort of wonder whether you think you've contributed to that at all.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think as retailers, generally retailers are under the microscope. So I think that whenever there is, a brand that sells something that, the general public feels is over-sexualisation, I think brands are very quick to respond to that. I mean, certainly Ann Summers, as my own company, we've always approached the way we display our products in store, in a very responsible way. And even children coming into store, we wouldn't let, for example, a group of young girls come into our store unaccompanied by an adult. But if, a mum comes in with a pushchair, we make, sensible decisions and allow parents to make that decision themselves. So I think you can only operate in a responsible way, and I think most retailers do.
Do you think we've got the age of consent right at 16?
Wow. Listen, do I? I mean, it's something that we're used to, aren't we, as a society? We think that's right. As a parent, sitting here right now, I know my husband's already building the tower. I'd probably say, if I was talking about my own daughter, absolutely not. Of course not. She can't get, absolutely not.
Because it would affect your retail environment, wouldn't it? I mean, if we were do you have stores in the Netherlands, for example?
No.
No. I mean, if you did, you'd be operating in a very different environment there, wouldn't you? In terms
but
of
you have to
who
adapt.
you were selling to,
and you do have to adapt to cultures. I mean, I've had stores in Kuwait. I know, I know all about adapting.
How do you sell sex toys in Kuwait?
Well, you don't. But I understand that the women that wear yashmaks have the most beautiful, sexy underwear in the world. So, you have to adapt to cultures and you have to respect cultures and navigate your way around that. And you need the expertise to help support you with that because, it's not as easy to go into international countries as you think it's going to be.
So do you think you could operate, within different sort of sexual codes, if you like?
Of course you can. And, we're sort of knee deep in our strategy for the US, for example, right now, and we're still in two minds. Do we go, lingerie only, or do we go a mixture of lingerie and toys? You have to go with with what's right for that culture, and within that, you have to act in a responsible way, which I'm confident we always have done.
How prudish do you think Britain is now?
Nowhere near as prudish as it was nearly 40 years ago. I don't know. I think the further north you go as well, the less prudish we are.
Why do you say that?
Because that's just the evidence of sales and what's purchased and,
Tell me what I want to know. What's the difference? What are people buying in the north that they're not buying in the south?
I can't specifically say what they are, but there is no doubt that, in the early days when we were developing and the parties were... we'd have pockets in Glasgow and Edinburgh that were just flourishing. And definitely the more north you go, the more relaxed, people are, the less inhibited. I think we're quite, we can be a little bit uptight here in the south.
Are you selling to different social classes as well in different parts of the country?
Totally. Yes.
Or is it all across? Is what I mean. I mean, is it more working class in some areas, more middle class in other areas?
It's across the board. Our biggest challenge at the moment is, one of the great things about Ann Summers is that we have amazing brand recognition. 94%. Equivalent of Nike. What brand wouldn't love to have that? But we have an outdated perception of our brands in some ways that, has really been part of my sort of rebranding project that I'm very passionate about. And it's about telling, new customers, hey, we've changed, but also saying to our current customers, we're still the brand that you know and love. And that's, and I think a lot of brands, actually for different reasons, are also having to realise that they need to modernise their brands and move forward.
And are you more welcoming towards men now? I mean, is that the thing where you sort of go full circle, having kicked the men out, that you kind of need to welcome them back in?
I think that, we are essentially a female brand in the sense that 80% of our customers that come into our stores are women. But we also love men, and we want men to come into our stores too. So, it's about...
Where are men supposed to buy their things then?
It's about making men feel comfortable, because men feel a bit clumsy, don't they, going into not just Ann Summers, but any lingerie store. So it is about making men feel comfortable coming into the store. And certainly at weekends, we do see more men coming out with their partners.
Or at Christmas. Or...
Christmas Eve. Hey, we see a lot of men in store.
How many problems do you run into with complaints now? I mean, you've had your share over the years of people not liking what you do. Do you still have that?
Not really. I mean, it's just, it's different. I think Ann Summers is a heritage brand now on the high street, and I don't think people perceive Ann Summers in the way they did years ago, and I think people understand, what we stand for and why we're here. So I think those outdated perceptions are becoming less and less.
What about? I mean, you had a problem, didn't you, with a complaint from a Muslim group over a doll that you sold in the shop. What was it called? Must Have a Shack or something like that, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, what did you learn from that?
That was a long time ago now, but it was part of our learning journey, in the sense that we had quite a few controversial windows, and in the past, I guess that was part of our strategy. We didn't, we were a medium-sized business that doesn't have deep pockets.
Deliberately provocative.
We don't have deep pockets to invest in above-the-line advertising, and those controversial windows certainly caused quite a stir. Although some of those, obviously, that wasn't a window, but some of those. That wasn't even a window. That was just a bit of fun. That was, but...
So were you doing things for the publicity to cause the stir?
The windows, yes, but not that product. So that product, it was just a bit of fun. It was a hen night product. You can't do those sort of things now. Times have changed and retailers move with those times, and things are different, and we find fun in other ways.
And do you have residents complaining about you at all, or in town centres or anything like that?
No.
That's
nothing.
all
We
stopped.
don't have anything like that now. There were many challenges at the beginning, whether it be councils or, maybe some residents complaining about windows. We've done some. Some provocative windows. Every retailer wants their USP, and we wanted our USP, and we were always doing a nod to something, or we were being tongue-in-cheek. I'm definitely not ashamed of anything we've done in the past, because it's been part of that journey. But for me now, it's much more about empowering women, and building confidence in women. I think is something that is much more exciting.
We've touched on the problems in the high street in terms of the challenge of online shopping and what that's going to do to high street stores. What about the big impending business challenge of the next year, which is Brexit? How do you think that's going to affect what you're doing on the high street?
Yeah, I think there are a number of challenges for retail. I don't think it is just Brexit. I think certainly economic factors, I include that in there. Even sanctions on Russia by Trump are causing issues. I think the legislative burdens that we face, whether that be business rates, national living wage, apprenticeship levy, I think that you mentioned earlier about the dominance of online and how that impacts retail. And I think that's a big problem, actually, but not so much about the pace in which it's growing, because that's obviously driven by the consumer. But and we've heard a lot about it lately, but we're not trading from a fair level playing field, and that for me is a big problem.
Well, let's just break those down then. I mean, so business rates, the argument there is that online stores don't have to pay business rates, so they've got a natural advantage. Business rates do raise billions of pounds for the Treasury. What do you think should happen?
I really like Justin King's idea, actually, where you halve business rates and you increase VAT, because I think the reality is retailers aren't going to put their prices up, so it's not going to affect the consumer. It does mean that we're all paying a fairer, online are obviously having to pay more of their share, and I think the general public, businesses and the public, are irritated by the fact that there is an element of them not paying their fair share of the tax burden, and at the same time, we significantly reduce business rates. We're seeing so many heritage businesses, go under, whether we're talking about House of Fraser, we've had Toys R Us, we've had so many, and starting, of course, with Woolworths right at the start of all of this. This cannot carry on, unless we want to see our high streets return to residential, something has to change.
But why do you think you're immune from that? Because you don't think your high street stores are going to disappear, do you?
I think we've always run a tight ship. I think that we are having to consolidate stores. Of course, we've already reduced our stores. There's other things that retailers should be doing to make their stores attractive. That's about it's not good enough anymore just to have a great service. It's about making sure that you remove all of the pain points at every touch point of the customer journey. So those are the type of things. And I think it's also about making sure that we restructure our businesses in a way that, obviously it's easy to say putting the customer at the core of the business, but we do really have to do that. We have a customer department, we have a board director that's just devoted to the customer, so that we can make sure that there is that seamless experience right across all our channels.
So do you think those brands that have gone out of business could have been saved with better management?
I think there's a number of things. I think that certainly not modernising their brand. If you're talking about, say, somebody like Woolworths or BHS, then yes, that would fall into that category. But I think the main three things, that would be one, I think the financial burdens are crippling on retail at the moment. And I think that unfair, the dominance of online and that unfair playing field plays a massive part. Of course, there are things that the government can do, as well as reducing business rates or addressing business rates. Free parking for a start, and that's a challenging one. Again, it's a revenue. That's important from the government.
In town centres, yeah.
Yeah, but if we want to drag people away from the keyboard into the town centres, then you've got to have free parking. You've got to have a great leisure experience that becomes a family/community hub, and it's somewhere that they want to go to for the afternoon.
Would a no-deal Brexit affect you?
I am worried about Brexit. I wanted to remain because I think it was good for business. I think that, yes, it is uncertain right now, and I think we will go through a period. I think retail is expected to grow about 1% this year. I think that will probably stabilise and be neutral for a while.
But how would it affect your actual business? Can you just explain? I mean, would it affect your supply chains, or where does most of your stuff come in from?
China, Hong Kong.
So in that respect, you're not affected. So, by a no-deal Brexit, it doesn't
we're
really make any
affected-
difference to your supply
Yeah,
chains.
not to the supply chains, but to margins. Yes, we're affected by that, but we have to be creative and we have to work at that and we have to find solutions, and that's what we'll do.
Are you selling into Europe? I mean, do you have customers in Europe who are buying from you?
Yeah, I mean, we have online presence in Europe. We trade in the US is a much bigger, because we're with Nordstrom. And we will navigate that. that's what we have to do. That's what all retailers have to do. But equally, there are opportunities there, opportunities in the US. We don't sort of see international expansion as a bogeyman. That's an opportunity. And
because
that's one
it's
we're
interesting that you're a Remainer, given that your business isn't as dependent on European structures as others are. Yours is the kind of business that a lot of the Brexiteers have been saying, well, people who are importing from China don't need to worry. If you're doing business with America, you don't need to worry. We'll just get on with it. But actually, you didn't think Brexit was a good idea?
No, I mean, I just was looking at the bigger picture. I don't want to be isolated. I think it's good to be part of, I thought it was good to be part of a union and all of the deals that were achieved on the back of that. And the thought of having to renegotiate, I think it was something like 53, different deals, I think is, do we really know what we're letting ourselves in for? And so far, I don't think, and I don't want to sit here and be an I told you so, I definitely don't, but, it's not looking good at the moment.
As a big high street business, what do you think about the voices of business that we always hear from, whether it's the CBI or the Federation of Small Businesses? I mean, do they really represent British business?
Oh, good question. I think the difficulty is not so much about them. I think they do their very best to represent business. I just think the difficulty is whether we are being listened to, or those organisations are being listened to by those people in government that really can, listen. They're representing retailers after all. But I think...
Do you feel they represent you? When they go in to see ministers, do you feel that they are telling ministers what you think as
Absolutely.
well?
I mean, I've been in...
Because they're often portrayed by politicians as, they're just they're lobbyists with their own agendas and all the rest of it. They don't really speak for business. As far as you're concerned, they do.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to roundtables with the BRC, for example, who do a fantastic job in representing retail. I think the problem is that government will see, at the moment, I think they see retail as an easy way to put on another tax and add the burden without, and it's short-sighted. It's unfair and short-sighted, unnecessarily complicated, and retail, as we can see with our own eyes, is seriously paying the price.
Do you feel that you're part of the establishment now? Because you're a big business boss, you're very wealthy, you've got an honour. Are you part of the elite?
I don't see myself in that way, no. We still have battles to fight. We still have people to try and influence. And I'm always trying to do the best for my company, the best for my employees, the best for my customers. Those are the things that really matter to me. I have at times been, banging on ministers' doors and trying to get change. And it's a frustrating process. There is no doubt about that. And I would like to see much more engagement with businesses and listening to businesses. And, it is a very frustrating, drawn-out process that often doesn't go anywhere.
Just give me an example of that. I mean, when have you had to bang on ministers' doors to try and get something changed? How's it gone?
I think, I met with Sajid Javid, for example. And I think at the time I was talking about the actual overall problem of just listening,
When he was the business secretary.
Yeah. Just listening. And, that... whether it be about business rates, whether it be about Sunday trading, having conversations about Sunday trading. Everybody is scared of their shadow. Everybody is just scared of making a decision. The web operates 365 days a year, 24/7, and retailers have to compete with that. That cannot be right.
And did you get the sense that you were being listened to, that they understood?
I pause because there's a lot of, I didn't come away feeling confident. And I got very frustrated and I had lots of meetings, but didn't come away feeling confident that I was, this was stuff they would have heard before, not just by me, but by other retail leaders. But that doesn't mean we stop banging the drum. We keep going.
Because a Conservative government traditionally, sees itself as the party of business, the party that understands business. Is that how you see it? Doesn't sound like it.
I think definitely, for me, Conservatives would definitely represent business better than Labour would, if we're talking about the two major parties. So, not that definitely they represent retail better. Am I happy with everything they do? No.
There are plenty of people in business who say, this government is not the party of business right now. I just wonder whether you're one of those people, or is it that you're just dissatisfied with certain things?
No, I don't. I think, understandably, we all know government is completely distracted by Brexit, and you could make a case that is the right thing that they should be focusing on. But I think that you can't neglect business as usual or the stroke day job. And there are certain things that are fundamental. And if we're talking about anything that's fundamental, it has to be business rates. This is a complicated, outdated system that is no longer fit for purpose. We are all seeing the high streets collapse before our eyes. And if we don't want that to continue, then something radical has to change.
Do you think that's the real cost of Brexit, that it's distracting ministers and government from tackling other things that need to be tackled?
Of course it is. I think that's absolutely the case. But we are where we are, and I guess to a degree, some of that is to be expected.
Would you join the call for another vote, another think, the people's vote? What do you think of that idea?
For me, it's all about stability. I think if you did do another vote, another referendum, I think it would go the other way, frankly.
Why do you say that?
Because I think a lot of people are thinking, God, this isn't what I think people were just focused on immigration. I don't think they realised, understandably by when, this is not a criticism. I was actually a big fan of David Cameron, but I think he made the wrong call in calling the referendum in the first place, because that's why we have a government, to make those type of decisions. And we don't want to be burdened with a decision that we don't know enough about. And I think that most people would say, I didn't know enough about it. I made the call based on immigration, which was a big concern to me. And now we're seeing what that impact is likely to have on business and ultimately the economy.
And you think we'd get a different result?
I think we would. But that doesn't mean I think we should go for the referendum again, because I think that could equally be very unsettling, and we need stability. So
that's interesting. What do you think of the idea of a second vote? Do you think we should have one or not?
I'm on the fence. I need to give this more thought. It's a tricky one, because
if you were against Brexit and you think the country has changed its mind, why wouldn't you think a second vote is a good idea?
Because not everybody's changed their mind, have they? And, the thing is, it was a close call. It was a close call. I know that the Brexiteers won. Of course they did, and I respect that. But it was close. It was only a couple of 1 or 2% in it. Do I think it would change now? Yeah, I do. Do I think it's right to have a referendum? Right now, I feel stability is more important.
That's really interesting. I ask all my guests what they think is the most controversial idea they have for changing the world. Do you have one?
For me, it's about what we need to change to make women more empowered. And I have a couple of potentially controversial thoughts. Boys are brought up to be brave, girls are brought up to be perfect, which for me, it's no wonder that women then play down their achievements in later life. Another one for me is that I think we've got to stop model coddling our boys as we bring them up. And I think there is a tendency, and I have a daughter, Scarlett, but Scarlett was a twin and I had a boy as well. And I'm sure if I'd have brought up Alfie, I would have model coddled him as well. But the problem with that is by the time a man grows up and reaches the boardroom, it's no wonder that he expects the women to pour the tea. And that's something that, I really think that changing the world where women are concerned, it's not just about what we do in the workplace. It's also about that social conditioning and how girls are brought up, from a very young age.
I don't want to pry at all. Is there any more you could tell me about Alfie?
Yes, so I was pregnant with twins, and I didn't know what I was having, but I knew that one baby had a fatal abnormality and wasn't expected to survive the pregnancy. And actually, I was pregnant with a boy and a girl, and my son did survive the pregnancy and was born and lived for 8 months. So he was very poorly and very sick. And that obviously was a very, very challenging time for our family. And, we have our 9-year-old daughter now, and Alfie still plays a very big part in our lives in different ways. But these are just, one of the many challenges that sometimes parents, sadly, have to go through.
Did you have any choice? I mean, was there a deliberate decision that you had to take along that way?
It was difficult because we obviously did have the choice of a selective termination, and bearing in mind, at that point, they didn't think he would survive the pregnancy, let alone the birth. So it would have been a reasonable one to take, but there was a risk to the other baby, and we thought that nature would take its course. So it was very difficult for me because I grieved for my baby while he was in the womb. So then when he was born, that was quite a shock for me. And then, of course, to lose him again, to then have to grieve for your baby twice it's almost impossible to explain how that feels.
It makes us who we are, those sorts of experiences, I suppose. Jacqueline Gold, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
For joining us on Ways to Change the World.